Hey guys, welcome back to Bible class. Today we're going to be continuing our series on biblical narrative, on how the Bible tells stories. Yesterday we talked about plot, talked about how every section of the Bible, every story, every book, and even the whole Bible itself has a long, overarching plot. It has a story to it, right? At least every biblical narrative that is, narrative, every part of the Bible that is story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's important to pay attention to every single part of that and not take it out of context. As you remembered yesterday, people often take a part of the story of Gideon out of context to mean something that it doesn't. Today we're going to be learning about how characters are used in biblical narrative and what the ancient biblical authors kind of meant and wanted you to get out of seeing a biblical character. And a lot of the same ideas apply, is you really don't want to take that character out of their context. And there's a lot of things that can be misunderstood about how we're supposed to interpret biblical characters. Some people think that biblical characters are supposed to be, heroes or these people to look up to. And it's slightly different than that. And I think we're going to learn a lot in today's video. And once again, pause the video to stop and help you guys out with the worksheet. And you guys go ahead and get those out as we start the video. Okay.
We're talking about how to read biblical narrative, or in other words, how to read stories.
Right. And one of the main ingredients of any good story is characters who encounter conflict and then have to overcome it.
Yeah, let's talk about characters. In most stories, we quickly identify with characters because, just like them, we're in our own story having our own conflicts that we need to overcome.
Yeah, and good stories have characters with relatable struggles. We can watch them react to these challenges in different ways, and we get to see what happens as a result. Through characters, an author can show us their view of what it means to be human. The Bible's no different. Biblical stories use characters as a mirror so we can see ourselves and discover our own human nature in the reflection.
Okay, so this is the first answer to our worksheet, which is, what are we supposed to see in biblical characters? The answer is ourselves. Ancient biblical authors crafted these stories so that the main characters, usually the main characters and a lot of the people with the biggest roles, we're supposed to see ourselves in those characters. We're supposed to see how they succeeded and how they failed and how they struggled and how they persevered and what they did that worked and what they did that didn't work. We'll get a little bit more into that in this video. Basically, the answer to that first question is we're supposed to see ourselves in the biblical characters.
The thing about characters in the Bible is that they can be hard to relate to. I mean, often there's very little detail given about them.
Yeah, biblical authors develop characters differently than modern narratives. They prefer to communicate a lot through minimal detail. For example, we rarely hear what people look like in the Bible, but when we do, it's crucially important for the story.
Like we're told that Saul is tall, and David was kind of a runt.
And these become images of their moral character. Saul's height matches his love of status and power to impose authority, while David humbly accepts his low status and allows God to exalt and deliver him.
So people's physical appearances are symbolic.
Yeah, very often. Like Esau's hairy body fits his animal-like behavior, and Jacob's smooth skin matches his deceptive, slippery nature.
What other clues do we get about biblical characters?
Well, often people's names symbolize their role in the story. Abraham in Hebrew sounds like father of a multitude. Jacob means deceiver. Ruth means refreshment. And Saul, his name means the one asked for. He's the flawed king that the people requested.
So by packing all this meaning with very little detail, biblical stories can do a lot in a little space.
And they even leave out things that modern readers want to know about these characters. Like they rarely come out and tell us people's thoughts or motives.
Right, like when Moses saw an Egyptian beating an Israelite, he kills him on the spot. But why? Was this righteous anger, or did he just lose his cool? And was it okay with God that he did it?
Yeah, we're not told. because biblical authors usually avoid giving moral commentary. They would rather have a character's words and actions reveal their motives and then leave us to judge their behavior by seeing the consequences. So in the case of Moses, this murders the beginning of a pattern of his anger getting the best of him with bad results. This choice forces him to run and hide in the desert for 40 years.
So it was a bad thing. But he does meet his wife out there, so it's a good thing?
Exactly. It forces you to ponder. Through all these techniques, the biblical narrators keep their stories compact, memorable, but also engaging.
Okay, so that was a lot, but let's try to unpack some of what he was talking about there. So I'm going to answer that second question for you now. What is one big difference between biblical texts and modern texts? And the answer is there's a lack of detail in biblical texts, right? He's talking about how, and when you read books today, they usually give lots of details and descriptions about what people look like. I know you guys are reading Maniac McGee right now, and I'm pretty sure they have a description of what he looks like in the book, right? But in biblical texts, you don't get a lot of that. You don't get like what kind of color they had, or how tall they were, or anything like that usually. So that is the answer to the first one, is what is one big difference? And it's the lack of detail. The answer to the third question there, why don't biblical authors use a lot of detail? And the answer is because the detail they do use matters a lot. So that one's because the detail they do use matters. Like he said in the video, when they do give descriptions of characters, like Saul being tall and David being short, it's meant to represent something. We'll use this as, the word is allegory or metaphor. It's supposed to symbolize something about the character. So Saul being tall is a representation of how he saw himself. He saw himself as full of pride. He saw himself as big. And David saw himself as, he was very humble, which means he didn't think of himself very much. He just accepted what he was given in life to do and accepted it humbly. And that's why he was small. It's because he did not have a lot of pride. And when characters have names, that's important too. Like they said, characters' names often mean something in the biblical text, in the original language they were spoken in. It means, like Abraham, it means father of many. And I'll try to, as we go through the biblical story, give you as many of those names as possible, because of course we couldn't just figure that out from reading the English, but I'll let you guys know as we go through. And that's it for those two questions, and we're going to jump into the next two at the end of the video.
But seriously, was Moses being good or bad? Right? Like in classic stories, there's always a good guy and a bad guy, some admirable hero who faces off against some horrible villain.
Sure, and simplified characters like that are helpful for teaching children there's such a thing as good and evil. But the Bible's not a children's book. Its characters are very complex, a mixed bag of good and evil, just like us. There's hardly any flawless characters in the Bible.
What about heroes of the faith, like Abraham or King David?
So you mean Abraham, who used an Egyptian slave for sex and then lied about his wife 2 times to save his own neck? And David, the man after God's own heart, who sleeps with another man's wife and then murders him? These stories are anything but simplistic. They offer us realistic portraits of compromised people like ourselves. The real surprise is that God keeps working with them despite their failures.
So, just because a person's called by God or wins a battle, becomes successful or wealthy, it doesn't mean the biblical author wants me to act like them.
Right. It would actually be really dangerous to imitate most biblical characters.
True. But there must be something admirable in biblical characters, something I can imitate.
Absolutely. Pay attention, and you'll notice that most biblical stories highlight the moments when characters fail or come to the end of themselves, and then they choose radical trust in God's grace and wisdom. It's in these stories that the authors show us how to be a human who truly pleases God through humility and surrender.
Yeah, the fact that God stays committed to biblical characters is a profound statement about the patience and love of God, who is also a character.
Right. And by studying biblical characters, we can observe our own worst tendencies on display. And we see time and again God's gracious response that will see this story through to the end.
Okay, so that's the end of the video. So let's answer the last two questions on the worksheet. The first one, how are we supposed to learn morals from biblical characters? Now, if those of you don't know, the word morals is basically like, it's how to learn a lesson, right? Morals means like ethics, like what is good and what is bad. Morals is what should I do? And response is, what should I get out of this? How am I supposed to learn how to be better from this? Like your morals is your way of determining what is good and evil. It's kind of how you define that. So how are we supposed to learn God's description of good and evil from these stories and from these characters? Well, like we said, like they said, biblical characters are not always perfect. They're not always these heroes that we should look up to and imitate. In fact, a lot of the time, all of the time actually, every biblical character fails in some way. Every big hero of the Bible, every main character has some sort of flaw or some sort of bad or sinful event. Because guess what? They're all humans, just like us. And we all make mistakes and we all mess up. And the point is that even though we mess up, God will always be there to pick us up and help us out. And He continues to work with us and on us despite our flaws and our struggles. So the answer for the fourth question is, I actually didn't just cover this, but how we're supposed to learn morals is from the consequences, right? Like they said in the video, you're supposed to, as the biblical authors are crafting these stories, see how everything turns out in the end to sort of piece together how good these actions were. The answer to the last question, what is the best lesson that biblical characters teach us? The answer is, they teach us that God will be there even when we fail. That is the best lesson that these biblical characters can teach us. Because every single one, even the big names like Abraham and Moses and Joseph and David, they all mess up. And they all fail in some way, despite being these heroes of faith, these heroes of the Bible. What they show us is that even though they mess up, God is still there when they fail and still continues to work with and through them to achieve His purposes for His people. That is the best lesson. So again, the answer is the biblical characters teach us God will always be there even when we fail. All right, so that wraps up our video today. Thank you all for paying attention. Hope you guys aren't giving back too much trouble, and I hope everything's working out with the technology, because I know it's been difficult. And if you're having a hard time with filling out the forms and answering some of the questions, we'll work on that in the future, and I will be back next Monday, and maybe hopefully everything will go a little smooth then. I can get some feedback from you all about how you're feeling about these videos and about the Bible Project and how much you're getting, and we'll talk about potential quizzes and stuff then as well. So with that, I'm just going to pray for you guys, and then you can go on with the rest of your school day. Jesus, thank you for the gift of your word. Thank you that we have these amazing videos to help teach us and show us how the Bible was crafted, how the biblical authors thought, and how they used character to help us see more of you and teach us more about what it means to be human and what it means to know you. And I pray that you help every single kid here and everyone else in the world, help them understand more about you and more about the word. Please help these kids comprehend, understand what we're trying to teach and what we're trying to get across today. Thank you for everything you've done, and I pray that you continue to work on everyone here in their lives, and remind us that you will be there even though you fail. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, I'll see you guys tomorrow.